Environmental groups are describing proposed plans to force farmers to pay for their agricultural emissions as woefully inadequate. The Interim Climate Change Committee today released a report recommending farmers be included in the emissions trading scheme by 2025, with several options about how that could happen. One option included allowing farmers a 95% discount on their emissions. That's despite agriculture making up nearly half of New Zealand's total greenhouse gas emissions. Joining me now to discuss the proposal is Forest and Birds spokesman Geoff Keey. Hi, Geoff. 5%.
Hello.
Hi, 5%. Well, you've got to start somewhere, don't you? And isn't it better to have them in than out?
Well, I mean, it's obviously a good thing that they've finally accepted that climate change is something they need to be concerned about, and we're no longer hearing the Federated Farmers lobby telling the country that climate change wasn't anything to worry about. But, I mean, we're talking about 1 cent for every $6 of payout here, so it's not going to make really any difference.
And, well, you mentioned in real terms there, so what other examples have you got? Is it in terms of beef? What would it amount to?
So, it was 1 cent per kilogram of beef. So, if you think about your rump steak, that, 150 gram steak is going to be a fraction of a cent on that. We're talking about very, very small numbers here, mostly because of this 95% subsidy.
But that was already outlined in the coalition deal, right? So this can't be a surprise to you. Did you really expect them to sort of cast aside the agreement that they'd made with New Zealand First and do something completely different?
I mean, it wasn't a surprise. That doesn't mean that level of subsidy is acceptable. If we're talking about a landowner who, say, runs cows but also has a forestry block, they will get 100% of the credits for the forestry block and pay 5% of the cost of their emissions from the dairy block. It's just a double standard.
So, what you say, it won't really have any impact on farmers in terms of reducing their emissions. Why do you say that?
It's just hard to see how 1 cent on a $6 payout for dairy could actually cause anyone to really change their behaviour. I mean, we think about the changes, the fluctuations in the dairy payouts. It changes in order of dollars, between years. So, this 1 cent for every $6 of payout is nothing really.
So do you think
symbolic.
Do you think they need to be hurt financially in order to get them to change their ways? Is that the only way?
Well, it's not really a case about hurting someone financially, but you want to have enough of a price that when they look at their balance sheet that year, they've got an incentive to change. The whole point to having a price on your emissions is to create an incentive for people to do things differently and to innovate. If it's not big enough to enable that to happen, it's actually not much point.
So how much, in your view, is big enough to make that change happen? What's a reasonable figure?
I think you'd need to get a farm economist in to do those numbers. But certainly what we're looking at sort of that 1 cent and the $6 doesn't seem to be enough. That just doesn't seem plausible that would be enough.
So ballpark, though, you must have an idea. If you don't like 5%, do you like 10% better, 15, 20, 25? Whereabouts do you think it should lie?
Well, as I said, let's get some economists in and actually look at it properly. Let's see at what level farmers might want to change their behaviour. It's not something you can easily do, like pulling a figure out of the air, which is why I'm a bit reluctant to do it. We should be doing this sort of stuff properly.
But this is a climate change committee. Presumably they would argue they have done it properly.
Well, this is a government proposal. So the climate change committee has had a look at various ways that the industry could cut their emissions. And we have to remember that for dairy farming, a number of farms can actually cut their emissions probably sort of 5 to 10% and for it to be profitable. So there's a farm out at Lincoln University where they've been modelling more efficient farming, and they cut their herd size and their profits went up. So, there's a lot that farmers can actually start doing now But we're not seeing that.
So using that example you've just used then, I'm assuming that you don't buy into the argument that comes from some farmers that says that basically you'll take their competitive edge away from them if you do this too quickly, that there's not the technology available right now for the level of change that some people might want, and that they are some of the most efficient farmers in the world. Are those not fair arguments?
I mean, for starters, they're not just competing with other dairy farmers or sheep farmers. You know, they're also competing with non-meat products these days. You know, more people are sort of going for those meatless meals, and I think they need to be ahead of the game because they're not just competing with other farming producers. The other thing is, I just can't see how 1 cent in $6 is going to alter anybody's competitive edge when the price for dairy payouts fluctuates sort of, $4 one year and $6 another. It's a really tiny sum. I mean, fuel costs fluctuate more than that. It is a really, really small proportion of the operating cost.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Geoff Keey from Forrester Bird, who's not at all happy with that 5% of emissions that potentially farmers will have to pay as part of the ETS.